Turn with me to Psalm 125. I think that because of how many Psalms there are, 150, it's easy to neglect any given one. You know, it's hard to remember all of them. I certainly don't remember all of them distinctly, and I've taught and preached through them several times. And I think what it does for us is help us see some of the things that we really need to focus on. You know, if the Lord focused on it and thought it was worth including a psalm, then we need to pay attention to it and realize that's something we do need. And sometimes we have to think about it a little bit and realize the value that these psalms are to us. But look at Psalm 125. Think about some of the things that God is doing in this psalm. He says in verse 1, "Those who trust in the Lord are as Mount Zion, which cannot be moved but abides forever." And now he talks about those who trust in the Lord. You might ask the question, where is our trust? What are we trusting in? You know, Sennacherib asked the question of the Israelites in Hezekiah's day, what are you trusting in? You're trusting in Egypt? Well, it's a broken reed. You're trusting in your own selves? Well, you're no match for us. You know, are you trusting in God? Well, he can't beat me. Or he's on my side. He said several different things contradictory about that. But the Lord's who we need to trust in. It's who we need to put our confidence in. This psalm is not for all of the Israelites indiscriminately, but for those who trust in the Lord. That's who he's talking to here. Not people who trust in themselves, but people whose confidence is in God, who entrust their lives to God. What does he say about them? There is Mount Zion, which cannot be moved but abides forever. Mount Zion was a pretty significant mountain, certainly was to the Jews. And you think about a mountain as something that's immovable and stable. You know, mountains don't float around. They're not washed out or whatever. A mountain is solid, it stands. And that's what the Lord is to us. He says a Mount Zion, which cannot be moved but abides forever. He's stable. He gives us security. If we entrust our lives to God, we can have an unshakable confidence that we can trust in him. We can rely on him. He's not going to vanish when we need him or anything like that. You see the idea of the solidness of the mountain that's deeply into the rock of the earth. Think about Psalm 68 and verse 15. A mountain of God is the mountain of Bashan. A mountain of many peaks is the mountain of Bashan. Why do you look with envy, O mountains with many peaks, at the mountain which God has desired for his abode? Surely the Lord will dwell there forever. He's contrasting his mountain, God's mountain, with those other mountains. And really, they're jealous of God's mountain. They've got God living there. God's mountain is absolutely immovable. God is strong. He is not fazed by anything. There's nothing that changes him. So we can have security when we trust in the Lord. But then look at verse 2. As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people from this time forth and forever. Now, Jerusalem was not on the highest mountain in that area, and apparently there were mountains around Jerusalem that were somewhat higher. And so it's like God had a girdle of mountains around his mountain to provide even more protection. Think about how God protectively surrounds his people, encircles his people, provides for them, provides security for them. Kind of gives you the image of a protection that can't be conquered. And you think about all the things that the Lord has done to give us security, to give us a feeling that we're protected and we can count on the Lord to take care of us. I think about Psalm 34 and verse 7, where he says, "The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him and rescues them." Think about the angel of the Lord encamping around his people that fear him. He's got them surrounded, he's got them covered, so to speak. In Psalm 35, verse 5, he says, "Let them be like chaff before the wind." He's talking about the wicked. "With the angel of the Lord driving them on, let their way be dark and slippery, with the angel of the Lord pursuing them." The angel of the Lord chases the wicked, but he protects and surrounds the righteous. And there's so many passages that portray the idea of God guarding his people and God protecting his people. In Zechariah 2, verse 4, a man was sent out to measure Jerusalem. And another angel was told to go out and said in verse 4, "Run, speak to that young man, saying, Jerusalem will be inhabited without walls because of the multitude of men and cattle within it." Not going to work to measure Jerusalem. It's going to be so many people, it won't have any walls to hem it in. It's going to be immeasurable. But then look at the next verse. "For I declares the Lord, will be a wall of fire around her. I will be the glory in her midst." The idea of God being a wall of fire around her. You can't go through fire. You know, fire is a good protection if you're not the one being burned by it. And so he said, he's a wall of fire around you. You know, you can't conquer them. Or think about 2 Kings. You remember 2 Kings chapter 6 when the servant of Elisha was scared to death as to what was going on because he saw all the chariots and horses of the enemies, of the Syrians in that case, who were really frosted off and upset with God's people. And so in 2 Kings 6, verse 16, he answered, "Do not fear, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them." Then Elisha prayed and said, "O Lord, I pray, open his eyes that he may see." And the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. That changes things. If you could see that, you know, we often see the perils, the dangers, the frustrations, the discouragements, the dangers. We see the things that we feel like, I don't know if I can handle this. This is just overwhelming. This is too much. Well, if we could only see what that servant saw, and we see all the horses and chariots of the Lord surrounding us, full of horses and chariots of fire all around him. If we could see that, you think we'd be scared? Think we'd be overwhelmed? Do you think we'd feel like, man, I just can't handle this. This is just more than any human being can deal with. We don't have to deal with it by ourselves. We got the angels of the Lord and their fiery chariots surrounding us. That's why Elisha was able to be calm and serene when the Syrians were about to attack. You remember what happened in that case. God blinded the Syrians, and he brought them to the center of the Israelite army, and they wined and dined them. That's what God said to do. You know, give them a nice meal. And they kind of went home sheepishly after that. But God is the one who guards his people. So he provides security, he provides protection. Go back to Psalm 125, verse 3. "For the scepter of wickedness shall not rest upon the land of the righteous, so that the righteous will not put forth their hands to do wrong." The Lord controls the trials that his people go through. And so he says, the scepter of wickedness shall not rest upon the land of the righteous. I don't think he's saying that the scepter of the wicked can't light on the people of the righteous, the land of the righteous, but it can't stay there. It can't remain there. It's not going to rest there. It's a trial for God's people to remain faithful, and God limits that trial. He limits the extent to which he allows wicked people to prevail, because he knows that if it was too long, if it was too hard, we couldn't handle it. Remember Matthew 24 and verse 22, where he said about the destruction of Jerusalem, "Unless those days had been cut short, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short." God knew how much they could handle. He knew how far they could go. We're pressured into abandoning the Lord by trials and tribulations, but God sees to it that the scepter of wickedness doesn't land on us. It doesn't rest on the land of the righteous. It doesn't stay there. Ultimately, evil will not prevail. God limits how long evil can even look like it's prevailing. And he will keep us from being overwhelmed by those things. So God's a God that provides security, he provides protection, and he provides justice. He sees to it that we're not beaten down farther than we can handle. And then he calls upon God in verse 4. "Do good, O Lord, to those who are good and to those who are upright in their hearts." We have a lot of confidence that God will do good to those who do good. He loves the ones who do good. And not just who do good externally. We're good at doing some things that make us look good. But he talks about people who are upright in their hearts. What they do in private, they do in public. They're upright in their heart, in their character. You know, how many times have we put on an act and we've tried to make sure that the people we know that are Christians think good of us. But if they could see our heart, they'd be sickened. He wants God's blessing for those who are upright in their hearts. But as for those who turn aside to their crooked ways, the Lord will lead them away with the doers of iniquity. Peace be upon Israel. So there are those who turn to crooked ways, who twist and turn away from the true path. And God's going to punish them. The Lord will lead them away with the doers of iniquity. And then he wishes for peace on his people. God's peace rests upon us. And he says that a lot in these Psalms. Psalm 120, verse 7, I am for peace, but when I speak, they are for war. Psalm 122, verse 6, he says, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May they prosper who love you. May peace be within your walls and prosperity within your palaces. For the sake of my brothers and my friends, I will now say, may peace be within you. In Psalm 125 and verse 5, peace be upon Israel, that we just looked at. Psalm 128 and verse 6, he will say a similar thing when he says, peace be upon Israel. So one of God's blessings that he wants to give us is peace. And we can have peace even in the storm, like Jesus did in the boat, when we see that God is with us, when we see he's unconquerable, when we see he's our stability and he grounds us. We don't have anything to fear. We can have peace. But then look at Psalm 126. That talks about the idea of redemption, God bringing his people back to him. He says, when the Lord brought back the captive ones of Zion, we were like those who dream. Now, God brought back the captives of Zion in various ways at various times. If you think about the return from captivity, maybe that's what he's thinking about. And God brought them back, and it was like a dream. Every deliverance, every time God brings us back, it's an act of his. If we're talking about the deliverance from Babylonian captivity, it was God that delivered, not Cyrus. You know, they might have been tempted to praise Cyrus because he issued the decree that let them go back. We talked about that this morning in this Bible class, at least. And it's the Lord who was in charge of that. It's the Lord who brought back the captive ones when it's all said and done. We should never think that we've accomplished our own deliverance, that we're strong enough and smart enough and capable enough that we've managed to do it on our own, because that's not the way it is. He said, we were like those who dream. You know, the restoration that God gives, the blessings that God gives, are really too good to be true. You know, it feels like that. It feels like, well, I must be dreaming. It reminded me so much of Acts chapter 12. I really love this passage, where Herod has killed James, the brother of John, and he's got Peter in prison, heavily guarded, until after the Passover when he's going to kill him too. And on that very night, Acts 12:6, when Herod was about to bring him forward, Peter was sleeping between two soldiers bound with two chains, and guards in front of the door were watching over the prison. That's probably pretty much overkill for one prisoner, don't you think? And behold, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared, and a light shone in the cell. And he struck Peter's side and woke him up, saying, get up quickly. And his chains fell off his hands. And the angel said to him, gird yourself, put on your sandals. And he did so. And he said to him, wrap your cloak around you and follow me. Does he seem a little groggy? You know, he doesn't know, you got to kind of be told every step to take. And he went out and continued to follow, and he did not know that what was being done by the angel was real, but thought he was seeing a vision. When they had passed the first and second guard, and they came to the iron gate that leads into the city, which opened for them by itself, and they went out and went along one street, immediately the angel departed from him. When Peter came to himself, he said, now I know for sure that the Lord has sent forth his angel and rescued me from the hand of Herod and from all the Jewish people were expecting. He thought it was a dream. You know, God's blessings are so great that it sometimes seems like a dream. It couldn't possibly be real. It's got to be a mirage. You know, have you ever gotten to the point where you don't want to get your hopes up? You don't want to get your expectations up, because then you'll just be a letdown. You know, it can't be that good. You know, we kind of try to run it down so we're not disappointed. You can't do that with God. He can do more than we can ever imagine, more than we can ever expect. We were like those who would dream. We didn't think it could happen like this. We thought it was all a dream, which is an amazing way to look at it. Then our mouth was filled with laughter and our tongue with joyful shouting. You know, joyful shouting is mentioned 33 times in the Old Testament, 3 of them in this psalm. They couldn't contain themselves. You know, just break forth in joyful shouting. Look at the wonderful blessings, the wonderful redemption, the wonderful salvation that God has provided for us. It's just incredible. Joy is kind of the dominant theme of this Psalm 126. And it's not a quiet, subdued celebration. It's shouting with joyful shouting. And then they said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord has done great things for us. We are glad. Now, when you think about saying those things among the nations, there are just all kinds of psalms that talk about the wicked saying bad things about our confidence in God. Psalm 3, verse 2, many are saying of my soul, there's no deliverance for him in God. They tell me that God won't deliver, that God can't deliver. In Psalm 42 and verse 3, my tears have been my food day and night, while they say to me all day long, where is your God? What happened to your God? I thought you talked about your God all the time and things like that. And it's never what they think it is. And over again, you've got that in these passages. In Psalm 79 and 10, why should the nations say, where is their God? So here, they said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for us. These nations who were scorning them and scoffing, where's your God? What happened to him? Why don't you call upon your God? Well, God will see to it that the nations will be informed and will be surprised at God's acts of salvation, at God's deliverance, at God's redemption. They said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord has done great things for us. We are glad. You know, it's sometimes hard to know how to do that properly. You hear sometimes people talking about the great things God has done for them. But it's like a lower G God and a big T them. The focus seems to be on them, not on what God did. You've heard people like that they want to tell you all about what God did for them, but by the end of the time they talk 98% about themselves and about 2% about God. That gives the idea of telling the great things God has done for us a bad name. You know, it's kind of rubs you the wrong way. You realize, it's kind of tacky as well as not very humble and not very glorifying to the Lord. But think about a passage like Mark 5, where this guy was possessed by so many demons that he was acting like a monster man, a madman, living in the tombs. Nobody could contain him. He broke every chain they tried to shackle him with and all that. And then Jesus got a hold of him, and the demons exited into the swine that fell off the cliff and plunged to their destruction. And meanwhile, this demon-possessed man was perfectly okay. He was in his right mind. He was dressed and all that. That's Mark 5:15. Mark 5:18, as Jesus was getting to the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed was imploring him that he might accompany him. And he did not let him, but he said to him, go home to your people and report to them what great things the Lord has done for you and how he had mercy on you. Tell them what great things the Lord's done for you. Tell the people about your demon possession and how it was and what Jesus did. That's appropriate. It's right for us to tell the things God has done for us as long as we're keeping the God in the center, not us. As long as we're not trying to draw attention to ourselves and glorify ourselves. It's appropriate to tell people, here's what God's done for me. And when they say it here, the Lord has done great things. The Lord has done great things for us. That's exactly right. I mean, that's what they should say. And it's encouraging to other people when they can see the hand of God in our lives, when they can see the things that God has done for us. So that's an advertising arm for God. You know, they use that in advertisements a lot, testimonials from customers or whatever. That probably works. It makes sense to me that it would. You hear from some real Joe or ordinary person that says, this worked wonders in my life. As long as they don't get too extravagant in their claims, it probably brings in some business. And we want people to turn to the Lord. We want people to experience the great things from the Lord that we have experienced. So he says, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord has done great things for us. We are glad. What a gladness there is with the things the Lord has done for us. So he says, restore our captivity, O Lord, as the streams in the south. Now, in verse 1, it seems like he has brought back the captive ones of Zion. They have been restored. And then in verse 4, he says, well, restore us. It's like, well, have they or haven't they? And I think about a situation, kind of like we were talking about again in class this morning, like in Haggai chapter 1 and verse 10. You know, they came back from captivity, and that was a blessing. That was wonderful. They were back in their homeland and started back building on the temple. Didn't get too far. But God called for a drought on the land. This Haggai 1:11, a drought on the mountains, on the grain, on the new wine, on the oil, on what the ground produces, on men, on cattle, and on all the labor of your hands. And so they come back, but there was a drought. It was terrible. And then they turn to God and cry out to God, and God says, is the seed still in the barn? This is 2:19. Even including the vine, the fig tree, the pomegranate, and the olive tree, it has not borne fruit. From this day on, I will bless you. So the idea is that sometimes God delivers to a point, and then we turn to him for the greater deliverance, for the fulfillment of that deliverance. You think about that blind man in Mark chapter 8 that was healed in 2 stages. You know, first he saw men like trees walking around, which is a considerable improvement on total blindness. But it's not what any of us would look for, who can see relatively well. And so he needed a second dose. I think that's what's happening in this psalm. Maybe it is after they've come back from captivity, but they've not got their freedom and independence. They've not got their Messiah. They maybe not even got the temple. There's still a drought and things like that. So they're crying out, restore our captivity, O Lord, as the streams in the south. I mean, what God has done gives them encouragement to cry out to him now. They're in a new situation where they needed God to act again. And the fact that God had delivered them already, in one sense, should give them encouragement. When you think about the great things God has done for us, and especially you think about the times you've prayed and God has answered those prayers, it gives us so much encouragement. It's a good reason to try to remember some of the answers to prayers. I find myself taking them for granted and thanking God once or twice and then moving on. It's really helpful if we can think more often about all the things God has done, and it will give us a lot more hope that God will continue to hear and answer us as we keep speaking to him in the future. And so he says, as the streams in the south. And I think the idea is the south was kind of a desert region, the Negev. And if you get streams in it, that's going to give new growth. Isaiah 51:3, indeed the Lord will comfort Zion. He will comfort all her waste places. And her wilderness he will make like Eden, and her desert like the garden of the Lord. Joy and gladness will be found in her, thanksgiving and sound of a melody. When the wilderness becomes like Eden, and the desert like the garden of the Lord, that's what he's saying happening. The water in the Negev, God's going to give abundant rainfall so that it can flower and produce fruit and invigorate us. So we turn to the Lord for a renewal and a restoration and a revival and blessing. He says, those who sow in tears shall reap with joyful shouting. Sowing is not a lot of fun, and it doesn't show much. I mean, I can remember Dad with a one-row planter planting the sweet corn in the field. And, you know, you plant the sweet corn and nothing, you don't see anything. Maybe a little furrow of where the planter put the corn seed in the ground. It's just like that. It's going to be a few days before that corn you can get to where you can see it. And then it's just a little bitty green thing coming up out of the ground. You know, and so it's sometimes discouraging when we sow in tears. But we know that if we continue to sow and persevere in the Lord, we will reap with joyful shouting. Think about that when we face problems and challenges and discouragements in our life. How many times do we turn to the Lord and see him as the one who can turn the sowing in tears to reaping with joyful shouting? I think so often I've just felt discouraged or overwhelmed in a situation where I should have been turning to God and saying, I'll sow in tears and trust you to make me reap in joyful shouting. And that's the pattern of the Lord. He who goes to and fro weeping, carrying his bag of seed, shall indeed come again with a shout of joy, bringing his sheaves with him. You know, you sink your fortune into the soil, and you don't know what's going to happen, what the harvest is going to be like. To plant anything is sort of an act of faith. But when you plant with trust and reliance and faith in God, we trust that he will provide the harvest. He'll provide the result. We'll come again with a shout of joy, bringing us sheaves with him. That's what we need. That's the encouragement that we have, is to know that we can bring our sheaves with us when we come back. He's going to bountifully bless us, bountifully multiply what we've sown. So I see psalms like these as good psalms to encourage us in down times. In times when we feel overwhelmed, we feel discouraged, we feel hopeless, we feel confused, uncertain, weak, unprotected. We feel those things. So did the psalmist. And so that's why he included these psalms. God wanted us to have a pattern for how to pray and how to deal with things when it seems overwhelming. So I just feel like these are just very helpful to us. Those who trust in the Lord are as Mount Zion, which cannot be moved and abides forever. As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people from this time forth and forever. For the scepter of wickedness shall not rest upon the land of the righteous, so that the righteous will not put forth their hands to do wrong. Do good, O Lord, to those who are good, to those who are upright in their hearts. But as for those who turn aside to their crooked ways, the Lord will lead them away with the doers of iniquity. Peace be upon Israel. When the Lord brought back the captive ones of Zion, we were like those who dream. Then our mouth was filled with laughter, our tongue with joyful shouting. Then they said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord has done great things for us. We are glad. Restore our captivity, O Lord, as the streams in the south. Those who sow in tears shall weep with joyful shouting. He who goes to and fro weeping, carrying his bag of seed, shall indeed come again with a shout of joy, bringing his sheaves with him. Let's stand and sing.